You know what Apple, Google and Amazon have in common? They legally save billions of dollars in taxes. These business giants use complex international strategies to minimize taxes and protect their assets. We're talking financial offshore planning, a lawful practice designed for global compliance. Not only major corporations use this set of tools, but also entrepreneurs around the world. And today, we're going to explain how the strategies work, which jurisdictions are popular, and most importantly, where is the line between structuring and breaking the law. Disclaimer: for all the bad boys out there, we specialize in financial sunshine, not the shadows. What you will see here today are legal tools for running international business. I'm Marcel and this is Garant Business Consultancy. Let's dive in. Offshores have a long history. It's not a modern invention. Back in the Middle Ages, merchants had to pay sometimes over half of their earnings to king or whoever, which at some point became too much, so they'd hide their treasures in safe harbors. You could say offshores are the modern versions of a pirate's chest buried on a desert island. In the more civilized world of business, American and British ship owners in the 19th century started registering their vessels under foreign flags to escape tax regulations. That was a clear signal: if you can magically relocate a ship to a favorable jurisdiction, why not do the same with your money? By the 20th century, offshore havens began to take the shape as we know them today. In 1929, Switzerland introduced strict banking secrecy laws, generating capital from all over the world. Then in the 60s, places like the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, and Liechtenstein started evolving into full-on financial shelters. By the end of the century, large corporations weren't just looking for cozy tax harbors, they were building entire underwater financial cities that flew under the radar. Today, offshores aren't treasure caves, they're a sophisticated system for protecting assets and legally saving on taxes. But here's the key: you need to know where legal optimization ends and dangers begin. Let's start by looking how offshore structures actually work, how companies move money across borders, reduce tax rates, and secure investments. We'll focus on three classic strategies: the Dutch sandwich, the double Irish, and the use of nominee directors. One more time, just to make sure, all info here is legit, though they require precise execution. Tax optimization is not tax evasion. It is a smart way to use international rules. In business, like in chess, for example, the game changes dramatically once you understand the rules. Strategy 1. The Dutch sandwich. Picture a sandwich, 2 slices of bread and something yummy in the middle. In our case, the bread is made up of 2 Irish companies, and the filling is a Dutch entity. How does it work? Let's say you're a large international company. You set up 3 corporations, 2 in Ireland and 1 in the Netherlands. The first Irish company acts as your operational unit and collects revenue from global sales. The second one owns your intellectual property and is technically a tax resident in an offshore jurisdiction, say Bermuda. The Dutch company is placed between them. The first Irish company pays royalties to the Dutch one. Then the Dutch entity transfers the money to the second Irish company, the one which is a tax resident in Bermuda. Why go through all this trouble? Because if the 2 Irish companies exchange money directly, it would be required to pay a tax on transfers to offshore jurisdictions. But by routing it through the Netherlands, which doesn't impose that tax, the money moves offshore legally and efficiently. And we're not talking about saving a couple of cents on the dollar. The profit can be massive. Let's take a textbook case: Google. They had an operational company in Ireland called Google Ireland Limited, which handled ad revenue from Europe, the Middle East and Africa. Their revenue flowed to a Dutch subsidiary, Google Netherlands Holding, avoiding Ireland's outbound transfer tax. Then the money moved from the Netherlands to Google Ireland Holdings, a second Irish company registered in Bermuda. This company held Google's intellectual property and received licensing payments, but paid 0 Irish tax, because it was a Bermuda resident. And in Bermuda, no corporate tax at all. Well, there wasn't, but more on that later. Thanks to this setup, Google legally reduced its corporate tax rate to around 6%, and they weren't alone. Adobe, Microsoft, Oracle, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, General Electric, Starbucks, everybody played the same game. Strategy 2. The Irish scheme. This one also stars the land of leprechauns, and while it won't grant you 3 wishes, it's pretty great at trimming a tax bill. Here's how it works. A large tech company, say Apple, sets up a subsidiary in Ireland and transfers ownership of its patent, software and other intangible assets to it. Then other branches of the company pay this Irish subsidiary royalties for using those assets. Why Ireland? Because its corporate tax rate is just 12.5% compared to 35% in the US at the time. Example: Apple's German office sells iPhones. Instead of reporting all profits in Germany, where corporate tax exceeds 25%, it sends a significant portion to its Irish counterpart as a royalty payments. And this isn't hypothetical. Apple set up two Irish companies, Apple Sales International and Apple Operations Europe. These two control most of Apple's international revenue. Profits from global sales were taxed at Ireland's favorable 12.5% rate. But it doesn't have to be Ireland. Take Amazon, for example. They use Luxembourg for their European operations. All EU sales go through two Luxembourg-based entities, one operational, one holding company. With no staff, no office, no real activity, the holding company owns Amazon's IP and licenses it to the operational one, collecting royalties. This setup, combined with local tax benefits, lets Amazon significantly cut its tax bill, reportedly saving about $250 million US. The EU didn't particularly like it and launched an investigation, but in the end, the courts ruled everything legal. Intellectual property remains one of the most powerful tools for tax optimization, and with the right structure, companies can dramatically reduce their liabilities, completely within the parameters of the law. Strategy 3. Nominee directors and shareholders. This is when your business isn't officially yours, or at least no one knows it is. Nominee directors are individuals listed as company managers on paper, but in reality, they make no decisions. The same goes for nominee shareholders. The process looks like this. You register a company in a confidentiality-friendly jurisdiction, say the British Virgin Islands, Belize, or the Seychelles. You appoint a nominee director, someone who signs the documents and acts as the formal manager. Behind the scenes, the real owner controls everything through private agreement, like a power of attorney or a secret trust deed. On paper, the company belongs to the nominee shareholder, but in reality, you are the one receiving all the profits. This method is often used by the multinationals to streamline international tax planning. It's also favored by high net worth individuals, investors, or politicians who want to keep their involvement in certain businesses confidential, or shield assets from lawsuits or hostile takeovers. Example: say a Russian investor wants to own a European business discreetly. He sets up a Cypriot company where a local citizen is listed as the director or shareholder. Legally, the business belongs to that person, but in practice, the investor controls everything via a hidden agreement. But of course, this comes with risks. What if your nominee decides to break the agreement? In many cases, proving the real ownership in court can be extremely difficult. That's why it's crucial to structure such relationship properly from the start. In most countries, nominee arrangements aren't regulated by specific laws. They fall under general contract or civil law. However, some jurisdictions have laws requiring disclosure of beneficial ownership, which limits how anonymous such setups can be. And in those places, the risk of a nominee secretly selling your company behind your back is virtually eliminated. Still, classic tax havens remain loyal friends to businesses around the world. Money talks, wealth whispers. That's why the world's largest fortunes rarely sit in your standard national bank account. Instead, they travel the globe, settling in jurisdictions where taxes are low and privacy is high. Let's take a look at where billionaires and corporations prefer to store their capital. First up, the Cayman Islands, a tiny Caribbean territory that's become a true haven for offshore business. Population, just around 60,000 people. The number of registered companies, over 100,000. Why? Because there are no corporate taxes, no income tax, no capital gain tax, no dividend tax, and confidentiality is through the roof. Details of ownership are not disclosed. No surprise that the world's largest hedge funds and corporations park their assets here. Plus, the country's economy is stable and tightly linked to the UK. The second one on the offshore map is Panama. The country made global headlines in 2016 with Panama Papers scandal. The leak originated from a law firm called Mossack Fonseca, which helped set up offshore structures. Over 11 million files were exposed, revealing names of former and current political leaders, officials, and public figures, along with their assets and possible conflicts of interest. But the scandal didn't kill Panama's offshore industry. The country remains a key financial hub. It's still home to classic structures using nominee directors. On the top of that, Panama hasn't signed on to international data sharing initiatives like the Common Reporting Standard, also known as CRS, making it one of the last strongholds to banking secrecy. Companies aren't required to file financial reports either, and strategically, the country is well positioned, since it's a logistics hub bridging both North and South America. Obviously, after the leaks, Panama had to tighten regulations, but loopholes remain. Despite global pressure, anonymous companies and weak regulatory oversight continue to attract big money. That said, choosing Panama now comes with higher risk. Authorities are watching offshore activity much more closely. Thirdly, we have Singapore, often called Asian Switzerland. Singapore strikes a balance between transparency and favorable business conditions. It's one of the world's most reliable financial centers and magnet for large-scale investors. What's the appeal? Corporate income tax is low, up to 17%. The business environment is clear-cut yet convenient, and setting up a company is relatively simple. Interesting fact, while Singapore offers offshore advantages for tax optimization, it also enforces strict anti-money laundering laws, which reinforces the legal nature of these strategies. And let's not forget, it's simply a great place to live, with high living standards and a great climate. Fourth on the list is Dubai. While technically not a classic offshore heaven, it offers tax advantages, including zero corporate income tax under certain conditions. Even the standard tax rate is just 9%, far lower than in most developed countries. But just like Singapore, Dubai doesn't carry the stigma of being a tax heaven, and registering a business here is seen as perfectly legitimate. Its reputation is clean and its banking system is stable. What else makes Dubai attractive? Strong asset protection laws, a well-developed banking network, and top-notch global logistics. Plus, its currency, the dirham, is pegged to the US dollar, giving businesses a clear and stable way to assess performance. The UAE's economy is steadily growing. Last year, GDP grew by 4%, and this year, forecasts show another 6% rise. And it's not just the oil driving this. The influx of new companies and capital plays a big role. Interestingly, Dubai only holds around 4% of the country's oil reserves, far less than Abu Dhabi or Ras Al Khaimah. That's why its ruler, Sheikh Maktoum, has focused on diversifying into tourism, business, and infrastructure, reducing the reliance on oil. It's a slower path, but far more sustainable one. Even though offshores aren't always about dodging taxes, the stigma remains, in part because of a very specific tool, bearer shares. Imagine you want to get a suitcase full of cash across the border. It's not going to be easy. Airport security might ask questions. Banks will want an explanation. But now, picture this. Instead of a suitcase, you're holding a simple piece of paper that gives you the ownership of an entire company, its property and assets. That's exactly how bearer shares used to work. Bearer shares are a specific type of security that belongs to whoever physically holds the document. Unlike ordinary shares, ownership isn't recorded in public registers or databases. Transferring ownership doesn't require contracts or a notary. You just hand over the paper. If selling an apartment were that easy, you'd just pass the keys and here's the new owner. Sell your iPhone or car and there is always a trace. But with bearer shares, there is none. That made them a perfect tool for hiding true ownership of businesses and financial flows. The holder could instantly change the company's ownership structure by just handing the shares to someone else, leaving zero paper trail in any legal document. How they were used. You see where this is going. I'm sure you can imagine a few schemes yourself, but typically it would go something like this. Illicit money, like cash from corruption or black market deals, would be channeled into an offshore company. That company would then issue bearer shares. Legally, the company belongs to whoever holds those shares, and not a specific person. And tracking their transfers is nearly impossible. That company could then start doing business, buying property, or investing in legitimate ventures, effectively laundering dirty money. After a few steps like that, you end up with a corporation holding clean assets, and the bearer shares are passed to the intended owner, who now controls everything. This setup also allowed people to move the money across borders without SWIFT transfers. Banks, customs, or regulators. And when the stakes were high, it was worth the effort. Even bribes could be handed over this way. No cash, no contracts, no trail, just a certificate. Legally, the recipient doesn't own anything, but can use the assets at will. And if things go south, say, the person is being investigated, the shares can be passed to someone else instantly. No names, no evidence. Handy, right? So what happened? Regulators eventually realized it was too handy. Bearer shares became a loophole in the global financial oversight. That's why most countries have now banned them. But where one door closes, others open. Complex trust structures and cryptocurrency have taken their place. And let's not forget offshore funds and nominee directors. They still get the job done just fine. Regulators are constantly tightening the screws on financial structuring, and it's not just about fighting crime. Countries don't like losing tax revenue, and they're not fans of anonymous business structures either. That's why tax havens are always under the microscope. One of the most powerful global tools in the fight against offshore schemes is the BEPS initiative, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting. It's specifically designed to stop companies from shifting profits into low-tax jurisdictions. Over 135 countries have joined the effort, including Ireland, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. Here's what BEPS has changed. First, companies can no longer artificially lower tax payments by inflating prices in internal transactions. Second, shelf companies, those without real operations, are no longer allowed. Every subsidiary now has to prove it conducts genuine economic activity in its host country. Third, any country offering opaque tax benefits must now disclose that information. Another initiative is CRS, the Common Reporting Standard, which targets financial secrecy. Under CRS, banks and financial institutions are required to share information on non-resident account holders with their countries of origin. Over 100 countries have so far joined, but there is a twist. CRS only applies to non-residents. For example, a Russian citizen opens a bank account in the UAE using a Russian passport with no visa or residence permit. If their account exceeds a certain threshold, let's say $1 million in annual turnover, the UAE must report it to Russian tax authorities. However, if the same person gets a UAE residence visa before opening the account, they are now considered a local tax resident in the banking system. In this case, CRS does not apply. And this is just one of the many legal loopholes in the system. Want to hear more? Hit the like button and leave the comment. I'll do a whole video on it. And subscribe to stay up to date. Some offshore jurisdictions are even changing their law under pressure. Take Bermuda, for instance, a popular tax haven once used by tech giants like Google and the Dutch sandwich structure. Bermuda is now introducing a 15% corporate tax, but only for companies with revenues over $750 million US, which means that most of us can relax and take it easy. Despite stronger regulations, the offshore industry isn't going anywhere. Global finance is constantly evolving. Schemes get banned, loopholes become obsolete, but new options always appear, from African and Latin American havens to decentralized blockchain-based platforms like DeFi. And let's not forget the semi-offshore countries like the United States. Surprised? States like Delaware and Wyoming offer tax-efficient corporate setups without the stigma. Offshores aren't just shadowy zones of secrecy anymore. The world is moving towards transparency, but businesses will always find ways to legally optimize taxes. It's highly unlikely that offshore jurisdictions are going to disappear. Instead, they simply evolve, adapting to new rules and regulations. Bottom line, offshores are just a tool. Like any tool, they can be used wisely or misused. Many legitimate businesses rely on offshore structures to build international holding companies, protect investments, and flexibly manage assets. For example, issuing common and preferred shares helps investors balance risk and rewards. As Cicero said, we must be slaves to the law to be free. Yes, the rules are stricter now, and financial tricks are fading away, but offshores are here to stay. Business will always seek a smarter and a more efficient path, and that's where we come in. I'm Marcel from Garant Business Consultancy, ready to help you navigate these waters legally and effectively. If you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more insights. See you next time, take care.